hello everybody. So welcome to this final segment of the symposium today. Hope you've enjoyed the middle segment of presentations. So we're calling this a Q&A session, and it's an opportunity for us to expand a little bit on the many discussion points that came up in Carola's original presentation, and it's going to be driven by questions that you the students want to ask, because obviously these issues concern you quite closely. We want to see what you think about these things and what you'd like to find out more about from Carola, and we'll see what kind of discussions we can get going. So this will last about half an hour. So we've got some starting questions. If anybody wants to contribute as we go along, this is usually what happens is people start thinking things once we get going, then please indicate in the Q&A line as before, and then we can bring you forward to say something. Okay, so I'll just hand over. So Alex is co-chairing this, and he's already got, I think, some starting points for us.
Hi, Carola. So I had a question from James Brown, one of the master's students, and he asked, how might we rebuild the industry following the pandemic?
Oh, wow.
Big one to start with.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there is a sort of saying, that I really like, we don't need a revolution, we do need constant evolution. And, so we probably, it's little by little, but I think, we're already doing it in talent, and young people, and young talent is already going out there and producing independent labels that are built on different kinds of models, and being open to experimenting, open to failure actually as well, and then testing different kinds of things, and understanding that, we're in this together. I do think we need to address the issue about fairness and fair pay, and the models around co-production and co-ownership really do that. And of course, it goes beyond streaming, and most of, performers will probably also experience or have experienced in the past this notion that if you're in the band, there might be also inequalities in terms of remuneration of who writes the songs, who's the lead performer, are you just a drummer? And I think all of those things we've avoided to debate and discuss and explore. So, in some ways, it's actually quite exciting. Can we create different kinds of co-production models? How would that look like? How do our contracts look like that? Our agreements, and maybe our businesses? How would that look like?
Brilliant, thank you. So my next question is more about funding from the government. So why do you think what you've defined as culture 1.0, things such as art galleries and museums, why do you think they get so much more funding than other cultures?
Well, I think this comes still from this notion of patronage. And I have to say, I do also like my Beethoven concerts. It's something that I really value. I also value that it's a public offer, that we all contribute to that offer there. And I think where we went slightly wrong is to define that type of art very narrowly. So again, in the UK, we're a bit better because we've moved very firmly into 2.0. But, when I was growing up, you could go into a public funded youth orchestra, but you couldn't go into a public funded youth rap band, for instance, or popular band. So those tended to not be funded. So it was actually those cultures which were attached to youth cultures, which weren't public funded. But I think we've moved on, and the UK is pushing in relation to that. I do think we do need public funded arts and culture. So we do need a sort of culture 1.0 as well, but we just need to balance it with also culture 3.0, and of course we are already strong in culture 2.0.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So to follow on with that, to me, culture 1.0, the way you described it, makes it sound almost totalitarian, in the sense that the government are dictating who gets the title of this highbrow culture and suppressing those who don't. And culture 2 seems like it's very much born out of capitalism, and culture 3 feels almost almost socialist. So I was wondering how we could promote culture 3 when our society is so much built on this capitalist base.
Right. Oh gosh, interesting question. Really interesting question. I'm just going to give an example of how you can play around with these things, but it's not from popular music. I used to lead a department which had an arts council funded arts center, a public arts center in its midst. So we as lecturers ran it, and it was part funded by the university, part funded by the arts council. So that's the sort of, culture 1.0 typical thing. And we knew we had a sort of director of that art center, and that was the gatekeeping. That person decided what is being put on, what is, is the quality art that could be performed as such. But because we wanted to explore Culture 3.0, what we actually did is, okay, can we actually consider that we go out in the communities, and we called it cutting hedge. So not cutting edge, but cutting hedge, because we were in a rural community, and we went to the communities, to the sort of old picture houses, to the old church halls, and we worked with the community and said, we do have artists coming through here. And then we collectively co-produced the curation of that, said, do you want to talk to the artist? Do you want to have an informal gathering? Do you want to have a formal one? Do you want to talk to the artist before or after? Do you want to have participatory stuff? And so, yes, the content might have been more Culture 1.0 type of art, but how we curated it and how we staged it, it was sort of Culture 3.0. And that can also go with popular music. So, and I don't know the name, there was a song which was Beethoven's Fifth. A rapper did that song. And some of you might be able to tell me what that was. But, that could be seen as Culture 1.0 content being mediated through Culture 2.0 culture, so a mediation of a different kind of content. And I think we could start playing around with that a bit more in order to soften the barriers of gatekeeping more. And although Culture 1.0 might have, sounded a bit, not totalitarian, but there's gatekeeping involved. The great thing about Culture 1.0, because it's public funded, it gives individuals that reliance on engaging with art for a depth, for a length of time. So in some ways, when I go around and talk about these things, what people have also told me, actually, the mixture between 3.0 and 1.0 is important, because 1.0 gives the possibility to fund artists publicly, so that they can really have a deep 2-month sabbatical looking into music performances, studying it, and it's public funded. That's good for that. There's Culture 3.0, because you work with communities and co-production, it might not allow you to have that your creative identity exploration as much as Culture 1.0. So I think that's why we need both. But the balance in terms of public funding is a bit off.
Brilliant. Mark, did you have any questions? I've got a couple.
Well, it's just something I suppose it's related to that. I was just going to ask you, Carol, if you talked earlier on about where Culture 2.0 is concerned. A big part of the problem is these sort of entrenched industry structures. Do you think also that there's a sort of deeply embedded within our culture anyway, that the artists themselves are quite enamored of Culture 2.0 as a sort of way of operating as a sort of creative individual? Does it imply there's a sort of process of re-education? I mean, does that make sense? There's a kind of almost a romantic ideal, getting the record deal, being recognised for your, sort of individual creative genius and so on. We're sort of under the shadow of that a little bit.
Yeah, and it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because it's most of people who've watched it, the concept is quite easy, so it doesn't need a lot of understanding. It's very easily grabbable, and we know the SoundClouds, we know the podcasts, we've experienced that type of democratization of that kind of technology allows us to do, but we're still a bit hung up. And I think that there are aspects that we haven't explored in the public, in education, in media, and it is something to do with IP and intellectual property, because we kind of still feel that, my God, we need to keep control in order to safeguard. But actually, when we think about it, copyright hasn't actually, in the late 20th century and then 21st century, hasn't quite safeguarded the property of the makers, of the producers, of their real owners. So there is a sort of disconnect that we've been, we still are in that place where we think we need to safeguard our intellectual property, but not realizing that the structures, the instruments that the economy has built up, that the policies have built up, that the laws, the legality, the laws that they have built something up which doesn't quite protect the initial origin of what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to protect the creative output of makers and doers and creators. So I don't know, I think education might be part of it. I'm actually someone who also believes there is a role for politicians, and I'm not jaded in terms of politics. I know that there are individuals out there that are really idealistic and want really the best for us as a country, for us as a society. And I would hope that, in the future we have political governance that explores these things, because I think we could flourish even more in the creative industries if we had individuals who would work with the experts, who would work with individuals who know the industry, but also want to explore different kinds of things, and maybe that sort of fear of failure is keeping us back as well. In some ways we do have to create a system where we can try different business models without jeopardizing our family's sustainability, things like that.
It's about a new ideological perspective, essentially, then here.
Yeah. And, of course, as you can tell, I don't quite have a British accent. It's not quite. British, it's Germany. And of course, in German, what the state in Germany has done quite well is how they support the small and medium companies. So that's middle, the SME sector is quite large in Germany and has always been seen as the strong aspect of the German economy. I think we've not attended to that. Yes, in the last few years we have, but there has been a lot of hoo-ha about what is centrally funded, and then it's been devolved again to regions, and then it has been centrally funded again. And there's so much head turning in terms of policy funding that is about boosting entrepreneurs, boosting innovation, boosting our enterprises and our economy, but it's whiplashingly head turning, and of course that takes a lot of effort. It saps a lot of energy, it saps a lot of money, and I think we have to learn the lessons there as well. So in some ways, if you want to be depressed about it, until we find a stable political democratic way of dealing with the country as a whole, we're probably going to struggle. We've done already so well in terms of the creative industries, but we're still going to struggle because we still, are the flags in the wind that are being blown in all sorts of directions. But, for me, there's a political dimension, and that's, unless we get the politics right, and for me that, but just personally, it's getting rid of first past the post, our sort of electoral system, because we don't have a voice at the moment. And of course, the last elections have actually shown that the whole younger generations tend to vote differently than the older generations. But somehow we're now going into the future with who, the older generation has voted forward. So there is a real disconnect. And so we have to attend to that. But of course, having said that, within the creative industries, we have done well. We are going to do well again, because as a country, that's just now in our DNA, that we're a creative country. And I could talk about the differences between German creativity and British creativity as a culture. And there are differences there. Germany is strong in some things, but, Britain is really strong in producing creative professionals. That creativity starts also in our education system. And yes, we got to safeguard that, music in schools, definitely we got to safeguard that. But, there's a lot that we can do in the small, but also in the big. Okay. So I'm waffling. I'm going really
Okay. I think we've got another question, I think, in the, have you got that one, Alex, from John Ricketts there?
Oh,
see that one?
Sorry, yeah, I didn't even see them pop up, but yeah. Why do you think the UK government in particular is having such a dismissive opinion in regards to music venues / clubs in regard to their cultural status? So we spoke to some venue owners the other day in New York, and they were talking about how they had to fight quite hard to be able to be put on the same platform as in terms of the local council, so they could be on the same platform as like the Minster and the Art Gallery and other theatres. We were wondering.
Yeah, gosh, it's an interesting one, isn't it? You know, and there were several legal challenges in terms of venues and clubs. I think, you know, it's quite a difficult question. It's an excellent question. And I think the things that feed into those tensions are that, you know, the political climate that we have at the moment actually safeguards housing owners, property owners, you know, the capital assets. And with that, they feel threatened by having music venues and clubs in their midst because it diminishes the value of the houses that they might own. You know, so there is a tension there, and I think there have been a lot of debate in relation to that. You know, at the moment the property market is still booming, and you kind of think, why? You know, nobody has money, but it's the way there are incentives in our country at the moment is that the property holders do have an advantage. And music venues threaten that because of the, you know, the noise and the loudness. But, you know, you know, it's a struggle. I think you know, gosh, I need to look it up, but I think 1 or 2 years ago, the sector did make advancements, and maybe somebody can come in and sort of talk about it if they know more about it, that there were regulations put in place that safeguarded venues and clubs in our midst. But I'm not quite up to speed with that.
Okay.
Yeah, sadly in New York that doesn't seem to be working, as loads of our venues and clubs are had to shut in the last few years.
Was that also before the pandemic? Was that?
So yeah, one of our main clubs and venues, Fibbers, had to shut.
Right.
And like anyone who's been to like a music night in New York has probably been to Fibbers at some point. So that hit quite hard, and that's when people started to really realize just how bad it was here.
And I think, you know, the only thing that I can suggest, and we you know, I mean, include myself in that, if something like that happens, I would nowadays encourage each one to go to their local MP, because just that person-to-person talk, you know, even now in the virtual world, you know, make a call, make an appointment with a local MP, and even if they are of, you know, a sort of ideology that one doesn't adhere to, you know, just having that person-to-person talk about how much those venues or those policies are valued, or, you know, whatever it is that one is fighting for, you know, that personal dialogue is really important for them to understand. And I think, you know, in terms of what has happened over the last 5 to 10 years in this country, you know, before the Brexit vote, I sort of realized that we all have become apolitical. We weren't involved in politics as much, you know, and it ran itself, so to speak. But I think, you know, if we do want to be involved in how our future looks like, and I think in the creative industries, you know, we have a lot to also fight for, because we have a lot to lose, and we were so successful in relation to that, then it's worthwhile just, you know, going to an MP and informing them about why certain things are valuable in the community, or why certain things are valuable in the local economy.
That's a really good point. For the students, Rachel Maskell is our MP in York Central. She's honestly brilliant. I went to her when Cuda shut recently during the pandemic. Nice. And yeah, she really listened. She emailed the MP for arts and culture about it. So nice. She does care a lot. It's definitely worth speaking to her about in the future.
Yeah, and I think all of that helps. You know, it's you know, sometimes we don't see the results of that, but, you know, when you look into it, you realize that those MPs then sit in Parliament and they talk about and they mention certain things that they've heard in their local communities to leverage certain things going forward. And anything that we can help, you know, especially if they're ready for that, you know, we are the experts in the creative industries. If we can give them in writing a one-page summary why this is important, then they can very easily, you know, be the advocate for that initiative in Parliament.
Okay, Russ has got a question. I think he's going to come up, actually. I think he's been queued to say something. But it's in the chat there anyway.
Yeah. What is the future of music production education in light of Culture 3.0? Now, wasn't there a podcast that is all about that?
There is again.
Yeah.
Weren't you involved in that podcast?
Yeah, I selfless plug, I suppose, but there you go. Now, in terms of Culture 3.0, what is the problem with music production education? What do we have to do?
Oh gosh. I could do another talk about University 3.0. I have this concept about University 3.0, which basically maps out how the future universities, need to look like, or what they could look like. And of course, Russ, you will know what I'm going to say. It's about partnerships, especially in the music industry. It's about allowing education, that we're the environment where learning happens, but where we don't own the knowledge, because the knowledge is all around us, as we know. And yes, we might be very much experienced, so we can facilitate the learning within the university setting in environments like these, which is a fabulous opportunity for learning. But actually, we want to get externals in there as well. And that's still quite hard with our current education system, because it's built on a University 1.0 and 2.0 kind of context where we build walls around us. So the idea for us, the ideal university for me, is rather where we can bring industry professionals into the environment very much easier. And many of us do that. And I know that, in your university, you do that quite a lot, but you will probably also know how difficult it is to fill out the contracts, to fill out the payment system, and how difficult that is. And then also for the individuals who come in, how difficult it is to manage that dialogue with the university, which is a multi-headed kind of beast. So it's so I think it's about rather understanding the partnerships and together forming that learning environment in which we all at different levels learn about our sectors, our futures.
Thanks, Russ.
What was that, Mark? Sorry.
Have we exhausted our?
I've got a couple more. So Carola, in your talk, you talked about how like a public piano is a form of culture 3.0, but in the UK, some of the most famous ones are the ones in like St Pancras Station in London. Yeah. There was one at York Station until recently. These were funded by the government or the council. So does that defund? Does that how they're being funded? Does that take away from the fact they're culture 3.0, or does that keep it there?
Yeah, gosh, it makes me think now. So I think I think that there is probably a way where we have to differentiate of where the funding comes from and what kind of cultural engagement we have. So especially when you look at the criteria or the aspects which are characteristic of Culture 3.0, there might be some aspects, and of course there's a mix and match. There might be, as I said, you could mediate through a Culture 3.0, but the content might be Culture 1.0. And I think maybe similar with the funding, it could be one patron who's funded something, but what that person has funded is actually very participatory. It's co-owned, it creates a co-ownership of the process. So I think there are these nuanced complexities, and certainly with the piano, I would say that the engagement with that piano is very much Culture 3.0. Now, who funds it might be a completely different thing. It could be individuals who just place instruments in places. And I know that our department where I was in, we've done that actually. We had an old piano. We asked permission to place it into a train station former hall, and they just accepted it. And it was just a small gesture that needed, and then it just changed the whole atmosphere of that space. But so I think there are nuances and complexities there.
Brilliant, awesome. We've had a question from Shannon McCarthy, and she's asking, where can we look for information, or are there any books on, firstly, the music industry's structural development into 3.0, and two, on the policy, into music 3.0, culture 3.0, and secondly, on the policies and the council's handling of music venues' importance to local tourism.
Yeah, the music venues, gosh, I would have to look that up, because there was a whole debate about that. As you can tell, I'm not quite as firm on the knowledge, and we always feel, oh gosh, we should know that, but
it's understandable, don't worry.
We don't. And that's okay. That's absolutely okay. So one of the participants of this group might in the future write a lengthy article about it and become the expert in relation to what has happened there. So that the challenge goes out there. Not wanting to do another plug by myself, but next year a book is going to come out which will deal also with the Culture 3.0 And hopefully that means that there is a sort of book which can conceptualize it. It's in various papers, and if you look up my name, there are some papers, and I think in the abstract there's a that paper which has crime and death in its title very dramatically. That at the moment, although it's from 2016, is probably the best description of what Culture 3.0 is, and it also explores a case study. But there will be more papers coming out, and it feeds into my publication certainly. But there is at the moment no Culture 3.0 book. But the future is there for the taken.
Brilliant. Did you have any more questions, Mark?
Well, just a quick one about if you've got any thoughts on this, Carola. What sort of technologies do you anticipate emerging to support a co-production model in the future? And will these provide a significant challenge to the more centralized economic models for music production?
Yeah, and I had actually promised in the abstract to talk more about distributed ledgers, and Russ actually pulled me up on that, and I didn't talk about distributed ledgers, which is a bit of a shame. So I'm really sorry that I didn't actually cover it. But the answer, I would say, has actually to do with distributed ledgers. And just in a nutshell, why it's so important is that at the moment, if you think about contracts between artists and labels, contracts with band members amongst themselves in terms of agreements, quite often it's a one-to-one negotiation, and the one-to-one could be organization versus individual, or organization versus organization, or individual versus organizational, but all of that are one-to-one negotiations, with each of the negotiations having to have a lawyer involved in that. And the smart contracts, which are part of the distributed ledgers, what they actually do is where you have an electronic digital system where you specify who's involved in your producing. So you have this network of individuals who might actually feed into your final album, and you map that value chain. You say, yes, that person has done 0.5% of the contribution to that, and that person has 30%. And that means that when it gets to the point of selling, and let's say you had something like Etsy for musicians, and somebody buys an album, or somebody buys a t-shirt from a concert that they went to, that value chain is embedded in there, and that already then dribbles down to each member that is in that value chain. That changes the complete way we remunerate, we co-own. It changes the way we can understand our contributions and feel that we're part of something. Now, again, the big labels, none of them have actually looked into it. It's actually individuals like Imogen Heap, as we mentioned. She set up a system like that. And of course, these distributed ledgers with these smart contracts are being at the moment taken up more on the digital side. So digital technologies, artificial intelligence companies, augmented reality companies, and it will probably be taken up in the film industry more than the music industry because we're so hung up in 2.0. But I think that will change everything. And of course, at the moment, there are struggles going on in relation to that. One example of that struggle is, if we take, for instance, podcasting. So if those of you who know how podcasting works, there's a feed which allows anyone to get that feed. So if I put my podcast up, it can be, you can see it from Spotify, you can see it from Apple Podcasts, you can see it from various different kinds of players. Now, there's a struggle going on at the moment because Spotify has said, we're going to do podcasts, but without the RSS feeds, without those feeds, which then begs the question, is this still a podcast or not? In my contextualization, that struggle is about not doing the democratization, not allowing a sort of co-owning of the process. And it's rather putting gatekeeping in. And then it would be Netflix for audio rather than a podcast, what they do if they take away that feed. So there are these struggles going on. We can see, in my contextualization, how I understood it, and it's my way of understanding it, rather than thinking about these companies just want to make money. It is rather these different business models, which are sort of Culture 2.0, big business types of models where you keep control over the IP versus those business models which actually value co-production, co-ownership. And of course, there are loads of aspects in relation to that. So I think what's going to come is, as I said before, the co-production model is going to come on strong, and it has already, even Patreon, getting funding through Patreon is part of that, ecosystem. But Yeah. So where does it go to? We'll see. But I think there are real opportunities, and to be aware of those is going to be really useful to position yourself. And individuals might want to just simply do a traditional, I'm going to start a new label and I'm going to do 2.0, and that's fine. And I'm going to do fair remuneration as well within that model. And I'm not going to use sort of co-production methods. And maybe that's fine. But there might be opportunities to really go strong into the other direction and say, well, how would that look like?
Okay.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Do you have any final thoughts that you would like to say, Carola?
Oh, it's been brilliant, I have to say. So I really, really enjoyed it. So I'm absolutely thankful for having been invited. It's been a brilliant morning. It's a great way to start a day thinking about the music industry. I could do that any day, I have to say. So thank you very much. And thanks for all the contributions and all the questions to, all the talent that we have in the virtual room here.
It's been a pleasure to have you.
Really
Popping out in and out of the sessions across the morning. I've seen some really, really well prepared, really sort of articulately delivered material, and it seems to have been a really sort of useful session for you. So congratulations to you all for doing your talks today. Hope you found it beneficial from a practical perspective, and also hopefully you've picked up a few useful ideas for completing your research projects now that we're in the final phase of that. Secondly, I'd like to thank Carola once again for your very prescient keynote, which has raised many relevant issues for the students. And it's given that, it's been good because it's given that bigger picture perspective on the industry that we often lose, when we're sort of focused on sort of doing our own creative work and developing our own sort of practical skills and so on. It's been really good to get that at this point as well, as we seem to be in a major period of transition. And thank you also for your participation, Carola, in the sessions with the students today. And I hope that we can continue to maintain fruitful links with you going forward. Thank you to our chairs today, Russ, Dave, Ben, and Alex. Really appreciate your efforts in doing this, making it smooth running. And I'm sure it would have been useful for the students to have your contributions in the talks they did today, helping them sort of move forward with their work. Thank you to Cameron, if you're out there, for your technical assistance today. We had a few issues to deal with, one or two things, and that it looks like that all got resolved and everybody did their presentations without any problems, so thank you. And to Angela for setting up and organising the Remo session parts of today, and being on hand behind the scenes as a stage manager, helping things to run. Again, been really good, really made things unstressful. And finally, just thanks to everybody who's attended. I hope you've got something out of it. I hope that you've enjoyed the day as a whole.
And I just also want to extend our thanks to Mark for organising today.
Pleasure.
Yeah, it went really well. Thank you very much.